out there. My name is Robinson Ario. I would like to commence this episode with thanking all those who have continued to send me messages in terms of criticisms. It is very important that we get feedback for whatever endeavor that we are involved in. Now, based on the comments and feedback that I got, I want to initiate this fourth episode with a response to a few of them. One of the most critical of them is that the people have argued that it is not just Chevron that is responsible for the underdevelopment of our community. Many among these have argued that indeed the main culprits are our community and its leaders. Why I want to disagree with that, I want to advance reasons, logical reasons why I disagree with that. Now, it is customary where a father travels out and leaves a senior brother at home with a few junior ones. When things go wrong in the house, what would the father do? Upon coming back, the father will ask the most senior and demand that explanations be made, and we hold the most senior responsible. Now, how do we apply this analogy to the relationship between Chevron and our hosts and their host communities? Remember that this series is titled How Chevron Underdeveloped His Host Communities, with special reference to the IRDC and CICD models of its development. Now, we may want to ask ourselves, how does the analogy of the senior brother and junior brother play out in this? The first place to start from is, can we try to analyze the composition of the community team vis-a-vis that of Chevron team? On the one hand, you have a Chevron team that is made up of well-selected graduates. They are people who pass through different stages of screening. And after passing through these stages of screening, they were sent for further training. So you have a cream of well-selected brains put together and paid by one of the most best job-paying companies in the world. Now, on the other hand, you have a group of community leaders, many of whom have not seen the four walls of a university. I am not trying to imply that certificates, takes care of everything in life. What I'm trying to say is that it is important to know that the community leaders are not picked by any credible means of selection. As a matter of fact, as of today, we have so much polarity in our communities that there's hardly any community that you can point to and say this particular faction is the legal or legitimate faction representing the community. And so, when you have such a team on the one hand of unselected group of persons who put themselves together anyhow, and you now have them having to negotiate with the first group that I described, well-selected Chevron workers. A few days ago, I made an analogy and said that it will be like a game between Baka and Warri Wolves. And a couple of people found it very funny. And indeed, I also find it funny. But that is the reality. The example that I've given now of the composition of the leadership of the community vis-a-vis that of Chevron will tell you where we are. Now, let us appreciate the fact that when we say that Chevron is underdeveloping our community, what that imposes on us is the duty to show with verifiable, logical, and credible evidence that indeed this is true. I'd like you all to know something. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a very critical document in appreciating what we're saying. The act prohibits a U.S. company coming to a foreign land to do business in such a manner as to encourage any form of corruption. And according to the spirit and intent of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, it amounts to corruption where you come to a country and you put in place those who occupy public offices to run an initiative of this nature, because the Act understands that where that occurs, there will be conflict of interests. And that is why most of those who are Chevron workers, most of those who are Chevron contractors know that their companies have been passed through a due process requiring them to fill forms to show that they do not have anybody serving in government who are directors in the company. And if they do, they disclose fully. So that's a critical component. But what do we have in the case of the Ishekiri Regional Development Council? We have people who are in government and who are holding key and critical positions. Now, I agree completely with Chevron when they started initially. The letter they wrote to Honorable Mofe Pira could also have been written to every other successive chairman and executive. But I tell you, like I said in the previous version and the previous edition, that it is only once that happened, and after then, caution was thrown to the winds. Would you be shocked if I reveal to you that up till today, the IRDC is not an incorporated entity? Now, when you do not have such status, it becomes very difficult to hold people responsible. And Chevron knows that. That is the reason why Chevron, no matter how influential a community leader is, if he retains a contract job with Chevron as a result of its community consideration, that individual will still necessarily have to register and follow the due process. Again, I have said that Chevron is a signatory to a couple of international conventions, one of which is the Voluntary Principle on Security and Human Rights. One of the provisions, the content of that document, is that Chevron will endeavor to study the peculiarity of a given people while advancing, executing, designing its intervention projects. Now, if you argue, for example, that what is happening in X tribe, it should actually happen in Ishekiri, what that means is that you fail to understand, and indeed, Chevron chooses to close its eyes to that particular provision. And that provision derives from the sociological understanding. As a sociology student, I understand the definition of culture within the parameters of relativity and dynamism. What that means is that culture is relative and it is dynamic. You move from place to place with different cultures. And so you must treat each group with its peculiarity. I know of no other tribe in Nigeria that speaks one language, that has one land, and that has one crown, one king. And so we are dealing with a peculiar people here. And therefore, whatever you are going to be executing, designing and executing in this place has to take into cognizance the peculiarity. We cannot but look at that. And so where you have this cream of well-selected people who have passed through screening called Chevron staff, sit down and negotiate with a group of unselected people, you can see that the dynamics are not favorable. And so when the outcome of that discussion or negotiation appears to be underdeveloping the community, as a father or as a concerned person, when you come, one of the things you will ask, you will go for the brains and ask, how come is it that despite the fact that you have this cream of well-selected persons here, that things can still go wrong? Chevron should not tell me that they lack the capacity, mental and otherwise, to influence the community in a positive way. That would appear to be what Chevron is saying by saying it is not within their domain. Now, but when the CICD, when the concerned Ishekiri Community Development Association started, as well as the IRDC started, like I said before, Chevron was pleased to intervene. That letter, which they wrote, accusing the chairman, the very first chairman, of delving into the sphere of conflict of interest, upon which Chevron decided to remove. That is part of the influence that they can wield in situations like this. And so I ask, if they could do it to Honorable Mofe Pira, how come they have not done it to the others? The answer is simple. That is because the trajectory, the current trajectory of development is one that they are comfortable with. They seem to have a propensity to think only of themselves, not minding whatever happens to the community. And I tell you, if you took what Chevron is doing here in Nigeria vis-a-vis these two models and look and pass it through the tests of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, vis-a-vis having constantly government appointees hold positions, I'm sure that you will discover that it is violently against the spirit and intent of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Thank you very much. I welcome your comments. I welcome your criticisms. Your criticisms will enable me to further highlight the issue. And I repeat, Chevron is underdeveloping his host community vis-a-vis the two key models of development. Thank you very much.